Good afternoon, ladies. Welcome to the Women's Club. I'm Eva Marie Clark, and Carrington Brown and I are chairs of today's program, and we extend a warm welcome to those here with us at the Bowling Haxel House and to those watching virtually. If you are in the building today, please take a moment now to silence your cell phone. We will have the usual time for Q&A at the end of the program. If you are watching live, please text your questions to 804-301-5718. And if you picked up a name tag today, please take it home with you to bring back to the club for future programs. We will not store name tags at the club. On your seats, you will find a book plate sticker signed by P. Allen Smith. He will remain on stage after the program is over and looks forward to meeting you. After the program and your visits with Mr. Smith, we ask that you exit through the side door located in the foyer or by the west door if you need access to the elevator. And at this time, I'm excited to introduce our speaker, P. Allen Smith. When I was asked to co-chair this program, I was thrilled to hear that P. Allen Smith was coming to speak to our club. He is regarded as one of America's most talented and influential landscape designers. I wanted to learn more about him, so I began watching episode after episode after episode of his TV shows on YouTube. It was a 4-hour binge. I was hooked on his straightforward advice on creating a beautiful environment that is in harmony with nature. I was also discovered that we share a passion for raising chickens. So I devoured all of his episodes on Poultryville, his amazing barn and area where he raises heritage roosters, hens, and other poultry. I couldn't wait to meet him and hear more. Mr. Smith is the product of 5 generations of Southern nurserymen. His childhood experiences in planting led to an appreciation for horticulture, genetic diversity, plant pairing, and an orderly, holistic approach to work. As a graduate student in England, he traced Thomas Jefferson and John Adams' famous tour of important English country homes. Mr. Smith uses historical precedent and context to identify and then sensitively accentuate the natural gifts of the landscape. He imparts balance, harmony, and beauty to his projects, both big and small. He creates environments that mature and improve with the seasons while framing arresting viewsheds. His designs often include poultry houses, sheep pastures, walled garden rooms, fruit orchards, herb gardens, container gardens, stumperies, rare rose collections, wildflower fields, pollinator drifts, apiaries, ponds, and follies. And many of these are a part of Ferme Ornée at Moss Mountain Farm, his 600-acre estate on the Arkansas River. Besides his Good Morning America, the Today Show, his PBS programming, and his 6 book publications, Mr. Smith is also deeply passionate and involved with preservation and conservation efforts. He is a trustee of Winterthur House, a former member of the Royal Oak Society, a certified fellow of the Royal Horticulture Society, an honorary member of the Garden Club of America, honorary president of the Herb Society of America, and a life member of the Livestock Conservancy, the Rare Breeds Trust in the UK, and the Society for the Preservation of Poultry Antiquities. He is a TEDx speaker and the founder of the Heritage Poultry Conservancy. Wow. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mr. Smith.
Thank you. How marvelous. Thank you, Eva. It's a thrill to be here. What an age we live in. What a year this has been. You all have been so kind to have me in the state of all this. And thank you all for coming out and being a part of this and all the good work that you do. I get to talk about one of my favorite things, gardens, and various people that I've met along the way. And I'm very excited about that. So let's get started, shall we? I had the good fortune to do my graduate work in England. And there, 200 years to the day, I went on the same tour that Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. You'll have to work with me here. I'm much better with compost than I am with computers. Whoops, let me go back. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Well, if it doesn't work, I can always give this talk with hand puppets. Whoops, whoops. There we are. There's the man. Not far from here he lived, and what an impression he made on this country. So in the spring of 1786, Jefferson and John Adams head out on a tour of English gardens. And Jefferson was interested in particular the gardens that he saw and really garnering ideas for Monticello. They used Whately's observations on modern gardening. It was one of those books of the day that listed all the really great gardens. And so he had this with him. And he was with Adams, really, he'd come over because Adams was the ambassador to the court of Versailles. And Adams was with the court of St. James, and he was with the court of Versailles. And they came together and tried to get an appointment with King George, and that didn't really work out. I think we've got it. The gardens that he saw were some of the typical ones, like Hampton Court, and you can see the formality of it. But what was going on in England, these formal gardens were breaking down, and you can begin to see it here at Hampton Court a little later. And by the 1780s, it was becoming much more naturalistic, much more to his taste. And this idea of the English landscape movement was underway. It had really been started by people like Alexander Pope and Charles Bridgman, but you could see it happening at a place even like Hampton Court that late. And Hampton Court was in the list of places to go visit. This is the William and Mary wing of Hampton Court that was designed by Sir Christopher Wren. And then these are the gardens that a good friend of mine oversaw the planting of and the design of it, Todd Longstaff Gowan. And you can see just how strict nature had been held in these very, very formal gardens. And it was great fun to go back a few years ago and see this restoration of these extraordinarily formal gardens and the precision at which they clipped the trees and contained these beautiful formal spaces. But what Jefferson was interested in were some of the other gardens, I think, the ones that were not old-fashioned, but looking into the future. This one's called Payne's Hill. And you can see this Gothic temple looking over a beautiful river. This is just very close to Hampton Court. So they went over and took a look at what was going on in this particular garden. And this was more to Jefferson's liking because it was in a beautiful natural landscape. This is the Turkish tent that Charles Hamilton had built. And then this is the old Abbey of Folly that he had built there on this garden. He was a lesser member of the aristocracy, didn't have as much money as others had. And so he went about creating these places that were affordable. I think this really Jefferson was attracted to it. The whole time, Adams was making commentary about the expenses that these Englishmen were spending on their properties. He couldn't believe it. And I think Jefferson was soaking up good ideas about it. They even went to Blenheim in Oxfordshire. Probably the grandest garden they saw other than Hampton Court. Of course, it didn't look like that. And in those days, but that's what Blenheim looks like today. But the garden, I think, that really resonated the most for him was one called Woburn Farm, and it was a true Ferme Ornée. What is this thing of Ferme Ornée? Well, it's a French word for farm, ornamented farm, but it had been practiced since ancient times, and it had become very popular among the English aristocracy in the 18th century. And this belonged to Philip Southcote. And the idea was, how do you make a piece of land, a farm, an estate, a small holding, beautiful, but also functional? And so this is one of the best examples of a Ferme Ornée. You can see this relationship of a farm against the pleasure grounds of a beautiful piece of property. And if you start to think about what we know about Monticello and lots of these other places, you can begin to start seeing how they were looking at, how can I be practical, but also how can I make it beautiful and really stylish? Well, William Kent was, to me, one of the most brilliant designers in English history. He was very close friends with the third Earl of Burlington, and he went on a tour, the Grand Tour, and stayed in Italy for several years. And he came back with Burlington and designed a house called Chiswick House. And this too was on the tour. And I love William Kent for many reasons. One, he was an extraordinary visionary, a fantastic designer. He'd come from really a very inauspicious beginning of painting heraldic crests on the sides of the aristocrats' coaches. That's how he started painting. He never was a very good painter, I don't think, but he had a broad imagination and did beautiful things with architecture. And he helped the Earl, third Earl of Burlington, one of the wealthiest men in England at the time, a young man. And his father had died and left him a tremendous sum of money. And so these two gents spend time together in Italy. They come back and they build this beautiful little villa, a little villa for the Earl to hold all of his beautiful things in. He also, William Kent, had a wonderful sense of humor. And if you'll notice, the little dog TTing on the aristocrat's leg here. Little 18th century humor. But notice the dome. Jefferson goes here and sees this long before he begins to draw Monticello. And then this, it's on the grounds of Chiswick, another domed building. We see something like this at in Madison's garden here in just a few minutes. But Jefferson was not very complimentary for the most part with these gardens. He was very critical of this garden. He said, an obelisk in the pond, useless. I think he was still smarting from sort of the British imperial nature that they had brought in force upon him, and smarting from the war. But this is at Chiswick House. And this is Chiswick House today. You can see this domed pavilion. And it's really quite beautiful. If you're in London, you should take a look at it. Now, what's interesting about Burlington is that Burlington House was eventually turned into what we have today as the Royal Academy. So when you're in London, when you go to the Royal Academy, you'll see the Earl of Burlington's house. The other thing that's interesting is the Earl of Burlington's daughter marries the Marquis of Hartington. And the Marquis of Hartington is heir to the seat, the ducal seat of Devonshire. And so you see Chiswick comes into the Cavendish family, and that's Chatsworth, looking across the Capability Brown landscape. Now, when I was in England, I got around and met lots of interesting people because I was following in Jefferson's footsteps day by day, literally on those days with his notebook, going to all the places that he went on that particular tour. I got to meet lots of very, very interesting people. Now, he didn't go to Chatsworth, but he did go to Chiswick. And I was in the School of Architecture in the Department of Town and Country Planning at the University of Manchester. And the Duke of Devonshire was our honorary chancellor, and he loved architecture. And he would come in and he would just stand and watch some of us working, and we'd have to do charrettes and things like that. He would comment. And he asked me one day, I made a comment, and he asked, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Arkansas." And he said, "Really?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Really?" And I said, "Yes, sir." I said, "I'm here to study gardens." He said, "Really?" I said, "Yes, sir." I said, I'm interested in the history of gardens and Thomas Jefferson's tour. He said, "Really?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "My wife's very interested in gardens." I said, "Really?" Well, he had a good chuckle over that. And we were headed to Chatsworth for a field trip. And there's when I met Debo Devonshire. Chatsworth is one of those great houses of England, and it sits in the Derbyshire Hills. And Debo was fantastic. She was great fun, as you all know if you've read anything about the Mitfords. I decided with my PBS television show to go and have a tour of England and visit some of the old friends that I'd made when I was there as a student. And I called her one day, went through Helen, her secretary, and got her on the phone and asked about coming to Chatsworth. She said, "Absolutely, we'd love to have you. Come and we'll treat you in the most princely way." And she did. And so we taped the show there after many visits. And here we are in the garden just outside their private quarters. But it was on this day, she said, "You know, Alan, just a week before, we had a very grand party." She said, when we have fancy people come to stay, you can't do ordinary flowers on the dining table, now can you? And of course, the dining table at Chatsworth runs from here to Charlottesville, it's so big. And on it, she had all this gorgeous silver, the way of epergnes and so forth. She said, "Come, let me show you some photographs." And so she went in the library, and I followed her in there. She produced, that's back when we had pictures, you know, that you could pull out of an envelope and show people. And here she'd had the staff make these plexiglass boxes, and she'd line the dining table with them and put hens in them. And there was epergnes of eggs between them. And she said, the most marvelous thing happened. She had Oscar de la Renta and Annette was there, and as well as the director of the National Portrait Gallery and his wife. And she said, but the best thing happened. One of the little hens laid an egg during the dessert course, which just thrilled her. And she loved chickens. And I think it was because of my Southern background and my interest in plants, and the fact that I don't live too far from Memphis, where Elvis is from. And she had a huge crush on him. And I love chickens, that we became great friends. And here you can see that famous Bruce Weber picture of her out there feeding her flock in her Cavendish jewels and evening gown. She was loads of fun. Also met lots of other people in the nearby county, or where I went to school in Manchester, a place called Arley, sort of a Downton Abbey sort of place. And I've quite by accident, stumbled upon the owner one day in the garden, Lord Ashbrook. And the gardens here are some of the oldest in Britain. These date back to, these herbaceous borders date back, not the gardens, they're much older gardens, but these herbaceous perennial borders date back to 1846. And they're often really sort of seen as the kind of thing that Gertrude Jekyll brought into fashion. But these are many decades earlier, and the family continues them. It's one beautiful garden room after another. And Arley is really a special place. You can see here some of the examples of it. And then this is Michael Ashbrook. This is Lady Ashbrook, the Viscountess Ashbrook's son, who's a very good plantsman. And I've told Diane that he'd make a great speaker for you all. And next is to him, between Lord Ashbrook and myself, is Lady Tollemache. Tollemache is one of the finest living designers in England. And it comes from an extraordinary place called Helmingham, which is a beautiful Elizabethan house with a full moat all the way around it. And staying there is loads of fun, because Lord Ptolemy orders the drawbridge lowered in morning and raised up at night, so you feel very safe when you're there. And what's fun about it is they're very close to the royal family, and both Harry and William used to love to swim in the moat with the Ptolemaic boys. So it's a beautiful garden that's on. You can see the moat also goes around the garden. The Ptolemaics came with William Rufus, came to England with the Conqueror and have been in Norfolk for a long time. Now we go back to this notion of Chiswick. I do think it really captured Jefferson's imagination. It had to, because there's Monticello. Very, very similar, don't you think? And I just, Jefferson was an absolute polymath and was interested in everything, but he had a real love of gardening, and you all know that, coming from Virginia, knowing him so well. But it was the way in which he took a mountaintop, which was very impractical, and turned it into a farm that was productive. Now, some would argue, how productive was it? But if you look to the left of the screen, you can see the orchards and gardens for food that are laid out. My friend Peter Hatch refers to him as America's first foodie, and I think he was. I think he was. And there's Monticello itself. I love this bird's eye view of it. And then this serpentine walk across the main facade of the house. Very naturalistic. And it begins to break down all that formality that we saw earlier. It would have been present in the first half of the 18th century, and certainly through the 17th century. But this embrace of nature is really what it's all about at Monticello. And here's beautiful views looking out over to the vegetable garden. The Gilbert Stuart portrait of Jefferson. And the vegetable garden, this is Peter calls him a revolutionary garden, and I hope you've had him here to speak. If you haven't, you should, because he does a marvelous accounting of Jefferson's keen interest in gardening, and specifically vegetable gardening. And the views from Monticello are really very inspiring, and they certainly inspired me, as you'll see in a few minutes as we get a little closer to Moss Mountain. But before we go there, I just want to call in to Mount Vernon for just a moment. We had the pleasure, my partner and I, James, to be there with our regent from Arkansas at Mount Vernon for the opening of the George Washington Library, Kathy Mayton, there in the center. And it was extraordinary to be there on that day, this beautiful estate. And while Washington didn't really embrace the ideas in such a formal way of the Ferme Ornée, certainly the position of the house and the gardens and how productive they were do align it with this idea of the Ferme Ornée. And there are a lot of people say that what we've done at Moss Mountain is very similar to what was done in a much more modest way at Monticello and Mount Vernon, with these little side dependencies and things like that. And I think there are some associations, and we do have a view of the river, but it's not nearly as refined as this. And what a gorgeous American icon. You can see how the drive is very similar to what we see in Monticello, the walk around being very naturalistic. And then these gardens that are tucked away behind these trees of natives that they loved. And then Madison, in many ways, the same, but there's very little, not nearly as much known about his interest and Dolly Madison's interest in the garden. But there are features in the landscape that we see time and again in English gardens, and I think that there was some of that was carried over, and they certainly adopted these sorts of things as eye catchers in their gardens. I've had the good fortune to know lots of very strong Virginia women, and so it's I just can't tell you what a pleasure it is to be here with you all today. I just finished the foreword to this book on the gardens of the secret garden techniques of Bunny Mellon, and she influenced some of what we did at Moss Mountain as well. And then I had the good fortune to know Nancy Lancaster when I was in school, and she came from a place called Mirador near Charlottesville. and she was really marvelous. And then, of course, Bunny Williams, who's a great friend, who's been to Moss Mountain and actually been on our television show, which we had loads of fun on a segment called Shop the House. And, you know, she's very good at doing tabletop decor. And so we decided she'd just go through the house and prowl through the closets and drag out whatever she'd like and put together these tabletops. And she did. I think she's brilliant. So Moss Mountain, let me go back, is about 600 acres on the Arkansas River. And we started this project about 12 years ago. And I feel very tired. It was a lot. And we carry on with it. The main house you can see was built anew, but designed to be true to place and time. And the idea is the Moss family came there in 1840, and so we built something that was very much one could have seen in 1840. It's interesting that Dolly Madison sells Montpelier in 1844. So this is an 1840s farmstead. And these are the long terrace gardens. And to the east, across this plateau, you'll see this is where we keep our livestock and so forth. And then this is Daffodil Hill to your right of the screen. And I guess there are similarities. The roof colors are red, like you see in Mount Vernon, but you know, that was the color of the day. It was called Tinner's Red. It was just a very inexpensive red paint. And so I decided to use it as well at Moss Mountain. And you can see there are a pair of little buildings in the back. There's one of them there. And then the octagons in the terrace garden, we'll see those in just a moment. But you can see we're high up on a plateau that looks out over the Arkansas River Valley. And there it is there, the valley beyond. And this was the land of the Quapaw when the Mosses first came. And sadly, after Andrew Jackson became president, they were all sent to what would become Oklahoma in 1907, when it became a state. So this is the sort of epicenter of the farm here. And you can see the early days, we kept a flock of sheep out in the front paddock. Now we're tourist park because we have people come from all over the country now. And that little building to the right in the foreground was a real hovel when we showed up. It looked like this. And this is what I had to start with. This was the best part of the farm. So you can see there was a lot of heavy lifting involved with it. It was really tough going. We swept away all this nonsense and left the fragments and the foundations of these houses and buildings and rebuilt them with the help of the local historical society, and threw up a sign with these entry gates at Moss Mountain Farm. So I'd like to give you a little tour of this Ferme Ornée, this idea of taking a rundown 1840s farm. What was wonderful about it, there's always a silver lining, is that no one had farmed it for so long. There was absolutely no chance of any chemicals being used. And if you know me from my television show, I'm all about organic everything. I don't like the use of chemicals inside or outside the house at all. And so everything you see here is organic. Below, you can see the center axis. There are the two little buildings. One's the art studio on the right and the summer kitchen on the left. The center axis you've got in bloom. You all know what that tree is because I saw them when I came from the airport. They do beautifully here. Vitex. That's Vitex Shoals Creek, which is absolutely stunning. And then this curved terrace garden, which was the first thing we built. And I just want to go through a little bit. There's that building that was just a hovel that I showed you earlier. We rebuilt it, and then the stone walls. We used stone from the farm and put the walls back into shape. And then it gave me an opportunity in this landscape to really get behind one of my obsessions, which is daffodils. We've planted, I'm embarrassed to stand up here before you and say, over 875,000 bulbs. I know, I'm in a 12-step program for this. And, but you can see, I've got, well, I think they've come from everywhere with that many of them. I know you all have growers here. And we've had the American Daffodil Society come, which was so much fun. You know, when you get a group of plant nerds together, it's just great fun. And you can see these sweeps of them, and we left a walking path. It's almost a meditation or prayer path through them. And there's two of our little Scotty dogs, little Scottish terriers, and the daffodils. And this is a good old early one of good variety called Ice Follies that we plant. You can't ever go wrong with Ice Follies. And we tend to like to just get out in the middle of the flowers and roll around in them and enjoy dining. This is a early spring little supper that we had. But really they start blooming in our part of the world very early, January. The first one is Rheinfeld's Early Sensation. Write that down, Rheinfeld's Early Sensation. And it blooms in January, followed by February Gold. And then suddenly the dam breaks and all these blooms occur. Big double ones like this one called White Lion. And then to follow are the bluebells, not Virginia bluebells, not Mertensia, but the Spanish bluebells that grow from a bulb. And then we go into that period of time with tulips. And we don't get quite as crazy with tulips. We only plant about 8,000 a year. And we love to use them in all kinds of fun ways. This is the idea of the Ferme Ornée, right? You use these things. You grow them and you use them and you drag them in the house. And this is our rose garden on the south, well, it's actually on the east side of the house. That hedge is on the south side. And I just want to draw your attention to this wonderful blue African basil. It's one of the best pollinator plants that we have ever grown. And it's really quite extraordinary. It blooms and we use it in flower arrangements. But you see there are a few roses in there. Now the roses dominate. This was taken a few years ago. This is what happens, isn't it? You pile all these plants in together and they fight it out. And that's what they're doing in this case. And early on, there's the African blue basil in the left side of the screen. And it blooms right through the heat of summer. We're always looking for things that will do well in the heat of summer. That's the hardest time to garden. And Jefferson knew this. He writes about it in his garden book, doesn't he? But early on, I used a lot of annuals, cosmos, amaranth, celosia, all this sort of thing in the gardens. And they make for a really great display, I think. We also divide the gardens, and this is where Bunny Mellon comes in. She had all those marvelous espaliers. And these espaliered fruit trees. This is one called Kiefer. It's a Kiefer pear. And they're incredibly generous with their fruit. And we prune these in that espalier form. Go back just a moment. We had the most horrific fire blight come through a few years ago. And I'm not able to move we had this fire blight come through. It swept in without mercy and wiped out almost every one of my beautiful espaliers. And so we had left them there for a month to see if they'd come back. We poured everything on them we could do, even called a prayer meeting, nothing worked. And so I couldn't bear to throw them away, so we hung them up. Now they serve as art, these corpses of trees. And we replanted them, and now they've done very well. The main house is really sited by a large 300-year-old post oak tree we call the Big Sister Oak. And she was the North Star for the design. And this is your daffodil field to the right. You can see it's been turned into a hay meadow. So there you have it, beauty with the daffodils and function with the hay to feed the sheep. These are the ideas of the Ferme Ornée. The driveway also becomes a complete circle for dining, all the way around the driveway in front of the house. And to be able to look out onto the pastoral landscape. having trouble here advancing the slides. Well, I may have to, Chuck, you may have to, there we go. To the west side of the house is what we call an alley of wisteria. Well, there we go. And I like to let the grasses grow long purposefully because we're trying to be more harmonious with nature in everything we do. And so, particularly in this year of COVID, when we didn't have a lot of visitors, I said, let it grow up. And so we cut paths only where we needed to go. We let it all go to nature. You couldn't believe the number of bees and pollinators and all kinds of birds and so forth that came out. It was really extraordinary. I think I'm supposed to hold it just right. Could we move the slide forward? There we go. And this is what these look like. These are wisteria trees that we've grown on telescopic poles as single trees. And when they bloom, they're really magical. And you can eat under them. And this is the Japanese wisteria, Wisteria floribunda, that has the almost foot-long racemes of flowers. It's the one to have. They're all sumo wrestlers, you know. They'll take a house down if you let them. They're like kudzu. You know about kudzu. And then we have fun too with things, you know, like we buy pumpkins to feed the animals. But before we feed the animals, we gather them around and we build a pumpkin house. Every year, if you follow me on Instagram or social media, you know that we build these. This year, 723 pumpkins is what it took to do the pumpkin house. But they're all different shapes and sizes and so forth. There are those vitex in bloom. We tend to keep the center part of the garden white. The garden at Chatsworth, when Debo was alive, it was all sort of white and blue. So we do white and blue here. And then to the right, it's cool colors. To the left, it's warm colors. There you can see a little closer in views of the river. And then again, sort of cutting the grass in the orchard. After the tulips flower in the upper terrace garden come the alliums. I love the alliums. These big, this is Purple Sensation, Gladiator, and there are others. And this is a wonderful rose called Cornelia, Caesar's brother, an old variety of Siberian iris along with Purple Sensation. But then we like to let things grow in this garden a little wild. You can see Verbena bonariensis, sometimes called verbena on a stick. Beatrice in the foreground coming along, and with all the grasses. I built these octagons because the previous tool sheds I had were really very dull and I didn't like them. And I thought we could do something a little more stylish. And so there was a project we were on. They were pulling this house down that was built in the 1920s. It was a perfectly good house with gorgeous handmade windows. And I asked for them. I save everything. I'm a hopeless pack rat. And so I grabbed up these windows. And so these buildings we used out of milled cypress from a neighbor in South Arkansas and traded pine and oak from the farm and built these octagons. Here you can see lots of lilies, true garden lilies, along with daylilies. And in the spring, I like old-fashioned flowers very much. This is, of course, bridal's wreath, Spirea van Houtia. And you can see this curve. You saw the curve when we looked as a bird looking down, how that walk curves. You can't quite see what's around the corner. That's intentional. You want to sort of draw people through, don't you? Don't give it all away at once. And here's the terrace. You go through those wisteria into this focal point, and you can see that big plant in the middle. That is a marvelous fig tree. She's over 100 years old. We call her Miss Big Fig. And Miss Big Fig, we thought was a brown turkey until a man by the name of Dr. Arlie Powell came from Alabama, and he's a small fruit specialist. It's good to have a small fruit specialist in your life because he sorted her out and told me that I was wrong, that she was indeed a Celeste fig. Nonetheless, the fruit is very delicious. And we moved her from up by the house. And there was a double wide trailer up there when we came, and we pulled it off. And there was this big fig. And I said, she has to have the appropriate place. She has to have an important place on the farm. And so I wanted her as a focal point here. And so my brother dug an enormous hole, and then they dug the old girl and lifted her up and set her into a big bowl of manure. And she loved it. And it was like a spring tonic to her. And she's been growing ever since. We love Miss Big Fig. There she is. Not long after she was planted, you can still see we're working on the house. So the garden came first. I like to keep my priorities in order. And soil matters to me. We scratched up soil. We went to the state fairgrounds and got all the manure. Manure is a lovely thing. And my brother gives me a load of manure every year for my birthday. I don't know what it says about our relationship, but it certainly makes the garden grow. But in making our vegetable garden, we created these huge sort of mounds, these tetons of soil that we brought in to amend the soil, which was good soil, basically good soil, but not enough humus in it. So we have to get very serious about it. And this is the vegetable garden we made. It's 1 acre of vegetables, all laid out on a grid. And there it is, with a central path, and you see it comes to an end here at this gate on the left. Well, it's acting stubborn again. There we go. But you can see in the beginning it was all rowed out and like, a field crop, and I didn't like that. That was boring. And so I decided to do them in a patchwork quilt, and that's what we have today. And we start very early with lettuce. Like Jefferson, I love to grow lettuce. I grew it from little plugs. He grew it from seed. And then here you can see lettuce and tulips in flower, along with onions, monarda and cabbages, all mixed together because the diversity, I think, is so important. I love art in the garden. These are all concrete chickens. They're easy to take care of, but the eggs aren't so good. And then this is that vista in late summer all the way through the vegetable garden. You can see hyacinth bean vine growing on it. And then you come around the corner and you look down this axis, but you come around a hedge purposely put there so you can't see what's beyond, because you're right at the precipice of this slope going down. And what it is to give this aha moment. Let's see, to look down this alley of hollies and potted hydrangea. And these have been there now for 6 years. And they've been through 6, I think was the lowest the temperatures have been, 6 degrees. And they've just flourished. But we carved this path out of the wilderness down to a pad, and Lady Tallmash was there, and she got so excited because we were digging out this big flat space, and she's very good with a dozer. She calls them a digger. She said, "Let me on the digger." And so Lady T got on the digger and started moving soil around when she came for a visit. And you can see the rose garden in the distance there below. But you have to walk down this alley of hollies with these accents of hydrangeas. I'd seen this in Italy and gotten a lot of good ideas going to the Villa Medici in Florence. And that's looking back up, and you can see there's a recumbent stag on a plinth at the top. Very simple things, just a brick plinth. And then this parapet looks over into the garden itself. And then this is the garden. I can't believe it's only 7 years old. But I had some brick left over from the house, and I had to do something with it. Why not, right? And so we built these piers. They reminded me a lot of Arley, so I built them. And then we did this oval lawn, and then the other bit of the garden makes an oval in the east-west direction, much larger oval. I think there's some images of that too, and that's an octagon. Then looking back up is where we just came, and then there's a fountain here at the base of it. And then there's the oval, you see the lawn, and then you can get an idea of the tree-lined oval that runs east and west. This is early on in the garden, and now you can see how the roses have sort of filled in. These buildings were taken inspired by the Aiken Rat House in Charleston. It was built in 1835. So this is very much meant to be an American expression of a garden in the style of the Ferme Ornée. And you can see that it's very popular for weddings and things like that. It looks like the bride is floating down from the top. And this is a marvelous Annabelle hydrangea. I'm sure you all grow it, hydrangea arborescens. And we cut these things to the ground. And don't confuse those with the ones I just showed you, which is hydrangea macrophylla. But these we cut and use in the house. Whoops, let me back up. Well, sorry. Well, we'll get to the peonies. Anyway, they make great cut flowers, in other words. Yeah, they're fantastic. So we do cut them down. We cut them in February, this close to the ground, and we fertilize them with, guess what? Manure. Sarah Bernhardt, the most well-known peony in the world. At Gilbert H. Wild and Son, which was established in 1885, we grow probably more peony varieties than anyone. And we have 40 or 50 varieties at the farm. We also grow more iris than I think anyone, and we ship all over the country. That's a beautiful one called Cordoba. I love the color of that one. It looks very good. They're all reblooming iris. And this is a peony type daylily. Isn't this one beautiful? Doesn't look like a daylily, does it? And then another great plant that we use are sun patience. I don't know if you all grow sun patience or not, but it's the easiest annual we grow in terms of annuals. And with all that we have to grow it very quickly. I mean, they have to be easy to grow. This is just a few shots of the inside of the house, the main central hallway. We have grain doors like you have here, but not nearly as nicely done, I might add. And this is what it looks like in the holidays, the central hall. And this is a statue of Carrara marble of America. I found her in a sale in New York, and her head was detached from her body, and she was missing her nose. And her arm that was extending was gone. And I called a fellow who does restoration work and a very good art historian. And he said, I can put her back together again. And he did. And he went to Italy. He was getting marble for other clients, and he put her back together. And we call that segment on our PBS show, Restoring America. You can see this wacky alligator down at her feet. But there were 4 of these for gardens, weren't they? They were in the Crystal Palace exhibition of 1851. So you had America, but there was also Asia, there was Africa, and Europa in America. And they all were beautiful maidens. And we have this, in the fall, we use feathers and all kinds of things to give her a boa. And that's looking out toward the porches and looking back across in the front parlor to Gilbert Stewart. Now up the street, and this tulipier is the main thing. I love collecting tulipiers for holding, these vases for holding flowers. And then these tall statuesque tulipiers belong to Debo Devonshire. And this is what my dining table now looks like. I collect books like I collect daffodils. Too many of them around. That's a bust of Hesiod. Very supportive, wearing a hat. And these 2 little rascals live in the house. That's Chatsworth and Culane. Very curious indeed. And there we are out on the porch. The porch is very important. I'm sorry that I'm having such trouble getting this to move along here. You know, when you like chickens or Scotty dogs, people every gift is either a chicken or a Scotty dog. Have you ever noticed? I mean, everything we get is a chicken. You know, and this has been going on for a long time. I have closets full of things that are chickens and Scotty dogs. Yeah, it's nice though. It's really lovely. This is out on the porch using succulents. I love succulents. I have a big collection of those. This was just just last week I put this together to show you. And the porches are deep, about 12 feet deep, and these are olive trees on either side. And this is the front porch looking out toward that big oak tree that I mentioned earlier. And then the misty views of the river from the inside of the house. I like to design gardens from inside the house because we spend so much time inside, but ways to bring you out is so important. I got very angry at a journalist once who commented about my chicken houses. She said I had a shanty town for my chickens because I kept them in cotton trailers, and I thought they were very nicely done. Well, it made me mad, and so I pulled down Palladio's 4 books on architecture and found an Italian villa from the Renaissance that I could Arkansasize. So I built this to house the chickens. It's called the Chicken Palace. And there you can see it in the background. And it's for our hens. These are by Forpingtons. And as Eva mentioned to you, I'm a member of the Rare Breed Survival Trust. And this is actually the Swiss ambassador who came to our farm and was taken away by the Swiss chickens that we had. They're called silver spangled Appenzeller Spitzhabens. Yeah. So he's holding one from the canton of Appenzeller. And last year, we're very proud of winning the national 2nd place in the National Turkey Show. How many people can say that? And these are some of our Sebastopol geese, the curly feathered geese. They look like they've been in a pillow fight, don't they? But we love collecting the poultry, and we've got little temples like this little Parthenon for the bantams for my niece, which makes it fun. I like to see children get involved with poultry. And this fits in the whole concept of the Ferme Ornée. Oh, I'm so sorry. Here we go. Whoops. You can see the silver-laced Wyandottes. You can see why, in the 19th century, poultry was referred to as the flowers of the barnyard in light Sussex. In these Dutch Hamburgs, silver Hamburgs, the patterns in these giant French geese, which I think are very dignified looking. And Cornish, that's the original Cornish game hen that you see. That's what they look like, not a white bird on a truck. And then, of course, we keep white Dorper sheep and lambs, which people just absolutely fall out over because they are adorable. And this year, the year of COVID, for Easter, a friend sent this one, which I thought was very good. It was a delicious cake, too. I hope you all come see us in Arkansas. Thank you for having me. Now, my good friends here, Margaret and Eva and Diane and others have said that there might be some time for questions, if you all have any. And I love answering questions if there's time. Yes? How many employees do I have to help maintain that farm? I just do it all myself. No, I'm just kidding. No, we have 3 groups of staff, and it depends on the time of year because we do everything seasonally. And so we have 3 men who work at the farm all the time, and they're very hard workers. And then we have a landscape division that comes in when we call them the cavalry when we need help. And so they come in and they'll help with the pruning and that kind of thing. And then we have hospitality group that's there to receive for me all the guests that we have from around the country. And those we're open on Thursdays and Fridays in the spring up until July, and then in the fall, starting in September to Christmas. And so that depends. You have some questions?
Yes, we have
Eva?
an online question from the virtual audience. I wonder how you control the deer from eating everything.
How do we control the deer? We post venison recipes up around, and through social media, they tell one another, and they've learned to stay away. No, they're an absolute nuisance. And we finally had to put up fencing. We did electric fencing for a while, and we even baited the electric wires with peanut butter. And that would shock the hair off of them. But they soon worked around it. So now we have 8-foot-high mesh that's built into all those hedges. Good question. Now, there was one over here, I think. Yes, you on the front row.
Yeah, about the eyebrows. You said you cut them to the ground. Are you saying you just cut the flowers to the ground?
No. In February, we cut the plants down to this high.
Oh, really?
Yes, really. and we manure them, and they'll grow up to chest high on me and bloom. But don't prune anything but the arborescens that way. You follow me? Only prune hydrangea arborescens that way. Don't prune the macrophyllus. That's right. I don't want a phone call from you next year to say, you caused me to kill my flowers. February. Yeah. Yes. Yes. But I cut them back to this far in February, and they produce a long stem. And that manure makes a long, sturdy stem. And the other thing is to get a better cultivar than Annabelle, one called Incrediball. Incrediball is stronger stem than Annabelle. So think about that. She said she had some of each, but she can't tell the difference. We have a virtual audience that can't hear you, and that's why I'm repeating your comments. Yeah, you better learn the difference before you start cutting them back, or you won't have any flowers. Yeah, question back there.
What zone are you, and what do you do about squirrels?
We are in zone 8A. What are you here? 7A? Yeah, so we're a little warmer than you. We don't have so much of a problem with squirrels because the farm is largely, now we may ultimately have a problem with squirrels in a shade garden we're developing now. But see, we're open, that's all open area. And we have hawks, and they love the taste of squirrel. So that comes in very handy. You know, keep your predators and, you know, prey in balance. You all are fun. Yes. African blue basil, and it's really the best. And in fact, we have a beekeeper whose name's Ted Junkin, and Ted was so taken by it. He used to keep bees on our place long before I took it. And about 3 years ago, Ted started taking care of the bees. He couldn't believe the honey flow coming from the farm because the hedges produced all this flow. The hollies flower in February, and the bees take the honey from it. Well, he saw this African blue basil that I had, and he couldn't believe it. And now he made 1,000 cuttings of it and put it around his beehives. And next year we'll add more and more and more. But it's an annual, so you have to ask for it. And I think it's better to do what? Oh, thank you. She said she loved how I used the Vitex. Now I will tell you, the best Vitex we found is one called Shoals Creek. Don't buy any other but Shoals Creek. It's the best. And the blooms on it, I'm telling you, are this tall. Come see me in June and you'll see them. They absolutely, and we cut them back in February. We cut all the stems down to the size of my finger. Start at the top and cut down to the diameter of my finger. You cut everything off, and guess what happens? You produce all these dormant buds come out and produce new stems. And on the ends of those new stems, what do you have? A flower. And that's why we cut the Annabelle hydrangeas back like that, because they produce from those dormant buds all these new stalks, and at the end of every stalk, you get a bloom. Yes, you all are very engaging. Yes.
You have keeper pears. I hope you're making pear pies. Do you have other uses for them?
Yes. My grandmother used to make what was called, she called her pear preserves pear honey. And there's a family recipe that'll be out in my next book about the farm, which is her pear cake recipe. And it is so good, as my granddad would say, it will make a bulldog break his chain. Yeah. Yeah. So watch for it. It'll be out in March, the book, Pear Cake. Yes? We do. I didn't have time. I'll have to come back. But the greenhouse, I've got a small greenhouse. It's about 12 by 10 feet that I can work in. That's very close to the terrace gardens. And that's where we store flowers that come in, and that's where I have cuttings and things like that. And then we've got a really big greenhouse that's in the work yard. We call it the bone yard. You've got to have a bone yard, don't you? With all the stuff that goes on a place like this. And that's where all the deliveries come in. And it's not very tidy. We keep it hidden from everybody. But you know, you have to have it. You have to have a work yard. Thank you all so much. Now, as I said, I'll be happy to stay and visit with you all as long as you like. And I just want to be as accommodating as possible because of these extraordinary circumstances. But it really does mean a lot to me for you to have me come in this state of the planet and to be able to speak to you and bully for you for all carrying on and taking good measure with all the safety rules and doing such a good job. You're a real model. Thank you. Yeah. Just say that again. And Incredible is just an improved variety of Annabelle. You what? No, I didn't say that. Yeah, I'm afraid I've confused you. You don't cut anything back. You leave everything alone. I'm afraid I've confused you.
I know, I couldn't hear you. But the Annabelle had range. Well, that I heard to cut down low. But then the other one that he said. Did he say what kind of